The stars looked different from here. Commander Jake Morrison pressed his face against the viewing port of the UES. Liberty watched as alien suns painted the darkness in colors that had no names on Earth. 3 months ago, he had been drinking coffee in a military base in Colorado. Now he was leading humanity's first contact mission through a wormhole that connected Earth to the rest of the galaxy. "Commander, we're getting signals from the station ahead," called out Lieutenant Lisa Park from her position at the communications console. She was young, maybe 25, with bright eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Jake had picked her for the mission because she was the best xenobiologist on Earth, even though she had never actually seen an alien before today. "What kind of signals?" Jake asked, turning away from the window. "It's beautiful," Lisa said, her voice filled with wonder. "The math is incredible. These aren't just radio waves. There's some kind of multi-dimensional communication system. Can't even begin to understand how it works." Captain Ben Harris looked up from his tactical display. He was older than both of them, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that came from years of military service. "Any chance it's a weapon?" he asked. Lisa shook her head. "No, definitely not. It's more like ... music. Complex patterns that repeat and change. I think they're trying to welcome us." Jake nodded. "Then let's go meet our hosts." The station ahead of them was massive beyond anything humans had ever built. It stretched across space like a metal city, with towers that spiraled up into the void and platforms that could have held entire Earth cities. Ships of impossible shapes moved between its docking bays, some looking like glass flowers, others like living creatures made of light. "How many species do you think are represented here?" Lisa asked, watching the alien vessels through the main screen. "The briefing said 12 major species make up the Galactic Council," Jake replied. "There could be dozens more." As the Liberty approached the station, Jake felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Earth had sent him here with simple instructions: make contact, learn what you can, and try not to start any wars. Nobody had expected to find a galaxy. In crisis, the docking procedure was surprisingly smooth. The station's computer systems seemed to understand human technology and guided them to an appropriate berth. As they prepared to disembark, Jake gathered his small team. "Remember, we're representing all of humanity here," he said. "We don't know what to expect, but we stay calm, we stay respectful, and we try to learn as much as we can." The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and they stepped into a corridor that seemed to glow with its own inner light. The air was warm and smelled faintly of something like cinnamon. After a few minutes of walking, they emerged into a vast chamber where their hosts were waiting. Jake had seen the briefing videos, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of meeting alien intelligence face to face. The being that approached them was tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to shift between blue and silver. Its eyes were large and dark, filled with what looked like ancient sadness. "Welcome, beings of Earth," the creature said, its voice somehow reaching them without moving its mouth. "I am Veltar, ambassador of the Celestian Collective. We've waited so long for your arrival." "Thank you for welcoming us," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm Commander Jake Morrison, and this is Dr. Lisa Park and Captain Ben Harris." Veltar studied them carefully, and Jake could see disappointment growing in those dark eyes. "You are smaller than we expected," the ambassador said finally. "The prophecy spoke of beings of great power and wisdom. We had hoped ... double quotes prophecy," Lisa asked, stepping forward. Veltar gestured for them to follow, leading them through corridors filled with beings that defied description. Some floated without touching the ground, others seemed to be made of living crystal. A few looked almost human, while others were so alien that Jake's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. They entered a chamber that could have held a football. Stadium in the center, arranged in a perfect circle, were 12 seats of different shapes and sizes. Most were occupied by beings that Jake assumed were the representatives of the major galactic species. 3,000 years ago, Veltar explained, explorers found ruins on the dead world of Cathara. Among the artifacts was a text that spoke of a great crisis that would come to our galaxy. It said that when the darkness threatened to consume, all life saviors would come from the outer rim to lead us to victory. A being that looked like it was made of pure energy spoke next. Its voice was like the sound of wind chimes in a gentle breeze. I am High Arbiter Xixthera of the Ethereal Collective. We are the High Arbiter of this council, and we must tell you that our situation is desperate. Jake felt Ben tense beside him. His military training was kicking in, analyzing the situation for potential threats and advantages. The prophecy described beings of pure thought and unlimited wisdom. Xixthera continued. We expected ... something different, something more than what we see before us. What exactly is the crisis? Jake asked, ignoring the implied insult. Another being, this one resembling a giant insect with jeweled wings, spoke up. The Void Swarm, it said, its voice like the buzzing of 1,000 bees. They came from the dark spaces between galaxies, consume everything in their path, learning from every weapon used against them. They have taken 40% of our galaxy already, Veltar added. Entire star systems have been stripped bare. Billions of souls have been consumed. Our greatest weapons are useless against them because they adapt to anything we use. Lisa was taking notes frantically, her scientific mind racing. How do they adapt? Is it biological or technological? Both. The insect being replied. They are a hive mind that treats technology and biology as the same thing. They reshape themselves to counter any attack. Jake looked around the chamber. At the assembled beings, despite their obvious intelligence and advanced technology, he could see fear in their faces. These were creatures who had ruled the galaxy for millennia, and now they were facing extinction. What methods have you tried? Ben asked. Every method known to galactic civilization, Xixthera replied. We have used weapons of pure energy, reality-altering devices, even attempts at peaceful communication. Nothing works. They consume and adapt, always growing stronger. Have you tried working together? Jake asked. Combined? Operations between species? Of course, Veltar said, sounding almost offended. We are a civilized galaxy. We coordinate our efforts, share our knowledge, and support each other according to established protocols. Jake exchanged glances with Ben and Lisa. He could see the same thought in their eyes that was forming in his own mind. Tell us about these protocols, Jake said. For the next hour, the council members described their military doctrine. It was elegant, sophisticated, and completely predictable. They fought according to rules that had been established over centuries of civilized warfare. They gave warnings before attacks, allowed time for surrender, and avoided causing unnecessary suffering. Jake listened with growing amazement. These beings had created a form of warfare that was almost artistic in its precision and honor. It was also completely useless against an enemy that didn't follow the same rules. Where are they now? Jake asked finally. The nearest Void Swarm fleet is 3 systems away, Veltar replied. They are consuming the Helios system. Estimate. They will arrive here within 2 months. And how do we kill them? Jake asked. The chamber fell silent. Several of the council members looked shocked by the bluntness of the question. We do not seek to kill, Xixthera said finally. We seek to restore balance to the galaxy, to find a solution that preserves the cosmic harmony. Jake looked around the chamber one more time. These beings had waited 3,000 years for saviors to arrive and save their galaxy. They had expected gods or angels, beings of pure wisdom and unlimited power. Instead, they got humans. Messy, violent, unpredictable humans who solved problems by breaking things until they worked. Well, Jake said, looks like you're going to have to settle for us. Dr. Lisa Park had never seen a laboratory like this one. The crystal labs of Nexus Prime stretched out before her like a cathedral made of living light. Alien scientists moved between workstations that seemed to float in midair, their tools, responding to thoughts rather than touch. Everything was beautiful, elegant, and completely impractical. The harmony calculations are off by 0.03%, said Dr. Quindell, a being that looked like a walking tree made of silver. We must recalibrate the quantum resonance fields to match the cosmic frequency. Lisa watched as the alien Scientists spent 20 minutes adjusting settings that could have been changed in seconds with a simple computer command. The Galactic approach to science was as formal and ritualized as their approach to warfare. "Have you tried just hitting it with a bigger weapon?" Lisa asked. The other scientists in the lab turned to stare at her. Dr. Quindle's leaves rustled. With what might have been shock, violence disrupts the natural balance, Quindle explained patiently. We must find a solution that works with the cosmic forces, not against them. Lisa pulled up the data on her tablet. For the past week, she had been studying everything the Galactic scientists had learned about the Void Swarm. Their research was incredible, detailed down to the molecular level. They understood exactly how the creatures worked, how they adapted, how they reproduced. What they didn't understand was how to kill them. "Look at this," Lisa said, pointing to a section of the biological analysis. The Void Swarm adapts by storing genetic memory of every attack. When they encounter the same weapon, twice they're already immune. "Yes, this is why our weapons are useless," Quindle agreed. "They learn too quickly." "But look at the storage system," Lisa continued. "It's based on energy signatures and molecular patterns. What if we use something they've never seen before?" "Impossible," said another scientist. This one resembling a floating jellyfish made of light. "We have used every weapon type known to galactic civilization. Energy weapons, particle beams, gravity manipulators, reality disruptors. They have adapted to everything." Lisa smiled. "That's because you're thinking like a galactic civilization. What about weapons that aren't from galactic civilization?" Meanwhile, in the war room 3 levels below, Captain Ben Harris was having his own struggles with galactic military doctrine. The chamber was filled with the finest strategic minds in the galaxy, and they were planning the most beautifully orchestrated defeat in military history. "The Void Swarm fleet will arrive at Xerion 7 in 6 days, announced Warsinger Kethfer of the Proud Winds. The alien looked like a cross between a bird and a dragon, with feathers that changed color. As it spoke, "We will meet them in honorable battle above the 4th moon." "Why the 4th moon?" Ben asked. "It provides the most aesthetically pleasing backdrop for the engagement," Kethfer replied. "The light from the system's twin suns will create optimal viewing conditions for the battle recordings." Ben stared at the tactical display. The Galactic fleet was arranged in perfect formation, every ship in its designated position according to regulations that were thousands of years old. It was like watching a ballet, except the dancers were about to be slaughtered. "What about the asteroid field?" Ben asked, pointing to the dense cluster of rocks between the 2nd and 3rd planets. "What about it?" asked Commander Xylthex, a being that looked like a humanoid shark. "It would be dishonorable to use the environment as a weapon." "It's dishonorable to who?" "To the memory of those who have fallen in battle before us," Xylthex replied solemnly. "We fight with honor, or we do not fight at all." Ben looked around the room at the assembled military leaders. They were brave, intelligent, and completely committed to losing with style. "What if we tried something different?" Ben suggested. "Different how?" Kethfer asked. "What if we didn't meet them in open battle, and if we used tactics they haven't seen before?" The room fell silent. Several of the military leaders exchanged glances that suggested Ben had just proposed something deeply offensive. "You speak of guerrilla warfare," Xylthex said finally. "Such tactics are beneath civilized beings. But do they work?" Ben asked. "That is not the point," Kethfer replied. "Honor is more important than victory." Ben thought about that for a moment. On Earth, there was a saying, "The dead don't care about honor." But he was beginning to understand that these aliens had spent so long being civilized that they had forgotten how to be savage. The next morning, Jake Morrison called a meeting of the human team. They gathered in their quarters aboard the station, a small suite that had been hastily converted to accommodate human needs. "How are you doing with the scientists?" Jake asked Lisa. "They're brilliant," Lisa replied. "But they're so focused on elegant solutions that they're missing the obvious ones. They want to find a way to communicate with the Void Swarm, to convince them to stop consuming the galaxy and the military." Jake asked Ben. "They're going to get themselves killed," Ben said bluntly. "They have all the tactical sense of a parade formation. They're more concerned with looking good than winning." Jake nodded. He had been having similar conversations with the political leaders of the council. They were so concerned with proper procedures and diplomatic protocols that they were paralyzed by their own bureaucracy. "The Void Swarm is going to hit Xerion 7 in 5 days, Jake said. "If we're going to prove that humans can help, this is our chance." "What do you have in mind?" Lisa asked. "We're going to show them how Earth fights a war." 2 days later, the mining colony of Xerion 7 was buzzing with activity. The colonists, a peaceful species called the miners who looked like humanoid moles, were preparing to evacuate according to standard galactic protocol. They had done this dozens of times before, abandoning their homes to the Void Swarm and hoping the military could drive the invaders away. This time was different. This time, humans were involved. "I don't understand," said Chief Miner Tolvac, watching as human technicians swarmed over his mining equipment. "Why are you putting explosives in our tunnel boring machines?" "Because," Lisa explained patiently, "your boring machines can punch through solid rock. If we modify them slightly, they can punch through Void Swarm ships too." Jake stood in the colony's command center, watching the preparations through the security cameras. Ben was down in the asteroid field with a team of volunteer miners, setting up what humans called surprises for the incoming fleet. "This is madness," muttered Warsinger Kethfer, who had come to observe the human methods. "You're turning civilian equipment into weapons." "We're using what we have," Jake replied. "Sometimes the best weapon is the one your enemy doesn't expect." Void Swarm fleet arrived exactly on schedule. 12 massive ships, each one a kilometer long and covered in the twisted metal and organic matter of consumed worlds. They moved in perfect formation toward Xerion 7. Confident in their ability to adapt to any resistance, the Galactic fleet was waiting for them, arranged in the traditional battle formation above the fourth moon. Every ship was polished and gleaming, their crews ready to die with honor. The Void Swarm ignored them completely. "We're not taking the bait," Kethfer said, watching the tactical display. "They're heading straight for the colony." "Good," Jake said. "Ben, are you ready?" Ben's voice crackled over the communications system from his position in the asteroid field. "All set, Commander. The welcome mat is ready." The Void Swarm fleet entered the asteroid field at full speed, their sensors focused on the colony ahead. They had adapted to every weapon the galaxy had used against them, and they expected nothing new from this encounter. The first explosion took out the lead ship completely. The mining charges that Ben had hidden throughout the asteroids were crude, primitive weapons that the Void Swarm had never encountered before. Their adaptation systems couldn't identify the threat in time to counter it. Now, Jake shouted, the mining colony came alive with weapons fire. Industrial lasers meant for cutting through rock sliced through Void Swarm hull plating. Tunnel boring machines launched themselves at enemy ships like massive missiles. Even the colony's garbage disposal system had been converted into a projectile. The Void Swarm tried to adapt, but every weapon they faced was different. Nothing followed galactic military doctrine. Nothing matched their stored knowledge of civilized warfare. "Impossible," breathed Kethfer, watching as the mighty Void Swarm fleet was torn apart by mining equipment and improvised weapons. "Not impossible," Jake said. "Just human." The battle lasted less than an hour. When it was over, the Void Swarm fleet was nothing but debris floating in the asteroid field. Not a single Allied ship had been lost. The galactic military leaders stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. For the first time in centuries, a Void Swarm fleet had been completely destroyed. "How?" Zalthex asked finally. "We cheated," Ben said, his voice coming through the communicator. "We used weapons they hadn't seen before, tactics they couldn't predict. We turned their own adaptation system against them." "But the honor," Kethfer protested. "The traditions of warfare." "The dead don't care about honor," Jake said quietly. "But the living do care about staying alive." Lisa's voice came through the communications system from the research station. "Commander, I'm getting some very interesting data from the wreckage." The victory at Xerion 7 had been exactly what the galaxy needed to see. Or at least that's what Jake Morrison thought, until he received the formal complaint from the Luminous Accord. Commander Morrison said, "Hi, Counselor Ethelyn, her crystalline. form shimmering with what Jake was learning to recognize as anger. The luminous accord formally protests the barbaric methods used at Xerion 7. Such tactics violate every principle of civilized warfare. Jake sat in the council chamber, facing representatives from the galaxy's most enlightened species. They had called this emergency session to discuss what they were calling the human problem. The battle was won, Jake said simply. The Void Swarm fleet was destroyed completely. No allied casualties. At what cost? Demanded Counselor Vexera, a being that looked like a floating flower made of pure light. You have introduced violence and chaos into our ordered galaxy. You have corrupted the very nature of our military doctrine. Your military doctrine wasn't working, Captain Ben Harris pointed out from his seat beside Jake. You've lost 40% of the galaxy using your methods. Better to lose with honor than to win with shame, Ethelyn replied coldly. Jake exchanged glances with Lisa, who was sitting on his other side. She had been quiet during most of the meeting, but he could see she was thinking hard about something. What if I told you that we found a way to make your weapons work better? Lisa said suddenly. The chamber fell silent. Even the protesters seemed interested. Splain, said High Arbiter Zixthera. The Void Swarm's adaptation system has a flaw, Lisa continued. It can only counter technologies it has encountered before. Your weapons are too advanced, too standardized. They've seen everything in your arsenal. Counselor Vexthera asked. And primitive weapons confuse their systems, Lisa said. They don't know how to adapt to something that shouldn't work in the first place. Jake smiled. Lisa had been working on this theory for weeks, and now she was about to turn it into a weapon. What are you suggesting? Asked Warsinger. Kethver. I'm suggesting we fight dirty, Lisa said. We take your advanced technology and make it look primitive. We use civilian equipment, improvised weapons, anything they haven't seen before. Impossible, said Commander Zilthex. Our weapons are standardized across the galaxy. They cannot simply be changed. They can if you let humans help, Jake said. 3 days later, Jake stood in what had once been the galaxy's most prestigious military academy. Now it looked like a junkyard. Human engineers had taken over the facility and were teaching alien cadets how to turn garbage into weapons. This is a standard food processor, explained Rick Sullivan, a mechanic who had volunteered. For the mission, when he heard they needed people who could fix anything, with a few modifications, it becomes a projectile launcher. The young cadets from various species watched in amazement as Rick demonstrated how to convert kitchen appliances into military hardware. Some looked excited, others looked horrified. Is this legal? Asked Cadet Prextel, a young member of the Silurian species. Legal is whatever keeps you alive, Rick replied. Your enemy doesn't care about your laws. Jake watched the training session with mixed feelings. These young aliens were eager to learn. But he could see the older officers in the background shaking their heads in disapproval. The galaxy was splitting into 2 camps, those who wanted to survive and those who wanted to maintain their principles. Commander called Lisa from across the workshop. You need to see this. Jake walked over to where Lisa was working with a team of engineers. They had taken apart a standard galactic medical scanner and were rebuilding it with parts from a dozen different devices. What am I looking at? Jake asked. The galaxy's first biological weapon, Lisa said quietly. Well, the first one they're willing to admit to. Jake felt a chill. Biological weapons? Not like you're thinking, Lisa assured him. It's a targeted virus that attacks the Void Swarm's nervous system. It only affects them, nothing else in the galaxy. And it works? Computer models say yes. But Jake, this crosses a line. The galaxy has never used biological weapons before. They consider them the ultimate violation of cosmic law. Jake looked around the workshop at the aliens learning to turn trash into weapons. They were already crossing lines that had been drawn thousands of years ago. How long until we can test it? He asked. That's the thing, Lisa said. We're about to get a chance. The Void Swarm is heading for Celestian. Jake knew about Celestian. It was the galaxy's most beautiful world, a garden planet where the peaceful. Silvani had created a perfect harmony between technology and nature. It was also home to over 1 billion beings who had never known violence. When Jake asked, 2 days. The defense of Celestian was everything the galaxy had feared human warfare would become. Jake stood on the bridge of his flagship, a converted luxury cruise ship that had been hastily armed with mining equipment and industrial weapons. "This is insane," muttered Warsinger Kethfer, who had volunteered to serve as Jake's liaison with the Galactic fleet. "We're fighting with garbage scows and civilian vessels." "We're fighting with whatever we have," Jake replied, watching the tactical display. "The Void Swarm doesn't care what our ships were designed for." Enemy fleet was massive, bigger than anything they had faced before. 50 ships, each 1 kilometer long, filled with the twisted remains of consumed worlds. They moved towards Celestian like a plague of metal locusts. "All ships, this is Morrison," Jake announced over the communication system. "Remember, they can adapt to anything they've seen before to show them something new." The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Human-modified ships attacked from impossible angles, using tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. A garbage hauler rammed a Void Swarm cruiser at full speed, its hull packed with mining charges. A civilian transport used its docking clamps to grab an enemy ship and drag it into an asteroid. "They're adapting to our weapons," reported Ben Harris from his position on the tactical display. "But they're having trouble with our tactics." "Good," Jake said. "That means we're doing it right." The turning point came when the Void Swarm tried to board the Galactic ships. It was something they had never done before, sending their smaller creatures directly into enemy vessels to consume them from within. "They're in the ship," screamed a voice over the communication system. "They're everywhere." Jake grabbed a welding torch from a nearby tool rack and headed for the airlock. "Ben, take command. I'm going to show these things what hand-to-hand combat looks like." "Commander, you can't seriously be planning to fight them with a welding torch," Kethfer protested. "Watch me," Jake said. The corridors of the ship were filled with creatures that looked like a cross between spiders and jellyfish. They moved with perfect coordination, their hive mind directing them toward the ship's vital systems. They were evolved for space combat. With natural weapons and armor that could deflect energy weapons, they were not evolved to fight a human with a crowbar. Jake waded into the creatures with a combination of tools and improvised weapons. The welding torch burned through their natural armor. A pipe wrench crushed their delicate sensory organs. When he ran out of tools, he used his fists. The creatures tried to adapt to his attacks, but there was nothing to adapt to. Jake wasn't using advanced technology or sophisticated tactics. He was just hitting them with heavy objects until they stopped moving. "This is impossible," one of the creatures managed to say, before Jake crushed its voice box with a hammer. "You cannot defeat us with primitive violence." "You're right," Jake said, hitting it again. "This isn't primitive violence. This is advanced primitive violence." The news of the victory at Celestian spread through the galaxy faster than light. For the second time, human tactics had achieved what galactic military doctrine could not. But this time, the cost was higher. The battle had been broadcast live throughout the galaxy. Billions of beings had watched human marines fight hand-to-hand in the corridors of starships. They had seen humans use tools as weapons, garbage as armor, and rage as a tactical advantage. "The youth are asking questions," reported Ambassador Veltar during the post-battle briefing. "They want to know why we never taught them to fight like humans, 'cause fighting like humans requires becoming like humans," replied High Arbiter Zixthera. "And that may be a price too high to pay." Jake looked around the council chamber at the faces of the galactic leaders. Some looked grateful, others looked troubled, all of them looked afraid. "You're scared of us," Jake said finally. Zixthera admitted, "You have saved us twice now, but at what cost? Our young people are abandoning their cultural values to learn human methods. Our scientists are creating weapons of mass destruction. Our military is becoming something we no longer recognize." "But you're winning," Lisa pointed out. "Are we?" asked Counselor Vexera. "What is the point of saving the galaxy if we lose our souls in the process?" Jake stood up and walked to the chamber's viewing port. Outside, he could see the fleet of converted civilian ships that had won the battle. They were ugly, improvised, and completely effective. You know what I think? Jake said. I think you're asking the wrong question. You're asking whether the cost is too high to pay. But the real question is, what happens if you don't pay it? Meaning, asked Veltar. The riots started on the Shen Prime, the capital world of the ethereal collective. Young aliens who had watched the Battle of Celestian were demanding to learn human fighting methods. Their elders were demanding that the humans be expelled from the galaxy before they corrupted another generation. Commander Jake Morrison watched the news feeds from his quarters aboard the council station. Peaceful species that hadn't seen violence in centuries were tearing themselves apart over whether to adopt human tactics. It's getting worse, reported Captain Ben Harris, entering the room with a datapad full of incident reports. 3 more worlds have declared neutrality in the war. They'd rather face the Void Swarm than work with us. How many species are splitting? Jake asked. 12 so far, Ben replied. The young want to fight like humans. The old want to maintain their traditions. Some families haven't spoken to each other in weeks. Dr. Lisa Park looked up from her research station, where she had been working on biological weapons for the past month. Her face was pale, and her hands were shaking slightly. I've created a monster, she said quietly. Jake walked over to her workstation. The screen showed complex molecular diagrams that he couldn't understand, but he could see the fear in Lisa's eyes. What kind of monster? He asked. A virus that targets the Void Swarm's genetic structure, Lisa explained. It doesn't just kill them, it makes their entire species sterile. One deployment, and they can never reproduce again. That sounds like exactly what we need, Ben said. It also makes their home regions uninhabitable for thousands of years, Lisa continued. The genetic damage spreads to anything that lives there. We're talking about sterilizing entire star systems. Jake felt the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. They had come to the galaxy as explorers and diplomats. Now they were, being asked to commit genocide on a scale that dwarfed anything in human history. How effective would it be? Jake asked. Completely, Lisa said. The Void Swarm would be extinct within 6 months. Is the moral cost? That's not for me to decide, Lisa said. I'm just the scientist who created it. A soft chime indicated someone was requesting entry to their quarters. Jake opened the door to find Ambassador Veltar standing in the corridor, looking more tired than usual. Commander Morrison, Veltar said, the council requires your presence immediately. We have a situation. The council chamber was in chaos when Jake arrived. Representatives were shouting at each other in dozens of different languages, their translators struggling to keep up with the anger and accusations. Order. It's called High Arbiter Xthera, but nobody was listening. The humans have corrupted our children, screamed Counselor Vexera, her light form flickering with rage. They teach violence to species that have known peace for millennia. Peace that was leading us to extinction, countered Warsinger Kethfer. The humans have shown us how to survive. At what cost? Demanded another voice. Half the galaxy no longer recognizes itself. Jake took his seat and waited for the chaos to die down. Eventually, Xixera managed to restore some semblance of order. Commander Morrison, the High Arbiter, said, We have received reports that your people have developed a biological weapon of unprecedented destructive power that Dr. Park has developed. A potential solution to the Void Swarm problem, Jake replied carefully. A solution that would render entire star systems uninhabitable, accused Counselor Ethlin. This is exactly what we feared would happen. You have brought the darkness of primitive warfare to our enlightened galaxy. Your enlightened galaxy was losing, Ben pointed out. 40% of it is already gone. Better to lose with our souls intact than to win by becoming monsters, Ethlin replied. Easy to say when you're not the one being eaten, muttered Rick Sullivan, who had been invited to the session as a technical advisor. The argument might have continued for hours, but it was interrupted by an urgent message from the defense perimeter. Commander Xylthex appeared on the main screen, his shark-like features twisted with fear. The Void Swarm is coming, he announced. Long-range sensors detect a massive fleet heading for the Nexus system. Estimated arrival time, 18 hours. The chamber fell silent. The Nexus system was the heart of galactic civilization, home to the Council Station and the galaxy's most important worlds. How many ships? Asked Xixera. Over 200, Xylthex replied. It's the largest fleet we've ever seen. They're bringing everything they have. Jake felt the blood drain from his face. 200 Void Swarm ships would be impossible to stop with conventional methods. Even human tactics wouldn't be enough against those numbers. We need to evacuate the system, said Veltar. Where would we go? Asked Kethfer. If we lose Nexus, we lose everything. The Council, the government, the entire command structure of the galaxy. Then we fight, Jake said. With what? Demanded Counselor Vexthera. We have perhaps 50 ships in the defense fleet. They have 200. Jake looked around the chamber at the faces of the galactic leaders. They were brave beings, but they were preparing for a noble death rather than an ugly victory. We have Lisa's weapon, Jake said quietly. The chamber erupted again. Half the council members began shouting about moral principles, while the other half demanded to know why they weren't already preparing to deploy it. The weapon is untested, protested Ethelyn. We don't know what the long-term effects might be. We know what the long-term effects of losing will be, Ben replied. Complete extinction. Better extinction than damnation, Ethelyn shot back. Jake stood up and walked to the center of the chamber. The shouting gradually died down as the council members realized he wanted to speak. 3 months ago, you waited for saviors to come and rescue your galaxy, Jake said. You expected beings of pure wisdom and unlimited compassion. Instead, you got humans. He paused and looked around the chamber. We're not wise. We're not compassionate. We're violent, stubborn, and we solve problems by hitting them until they break. But we're also alive, and we're very good at keeping other people alive, too. At what cost? Asked Zixthera. At whatever cost is necessary, Jake replied. You want to know the truth about humans? We've been fighting extinction events for our entire evolutionary history. Ice ages, plagues, wars, disasters that should have wiped us out completely. But we're still here, because we're willing to do whatever it takes to survive, even if it means losing your souls, asked Veltar. We've never believed in souls, Jake said. We believe in staying alive long enough to figure out what comes next. The debate continued for hours, but Jake knew what the outcome would be. And when faced with certain extinction, even the most principled beings would choose survival. The vote was close. 7 species in favor of using the biological weapon. It was enough. As the council session ended and the representatives began preparing for what might be the galaxy's final battle, Jake found himself alone with Lisa in the chamber. Are you sure about this? Lisa asked. No, Jake admitted. But I'm sure about what happens if we don't try it. The galaxy will never forgive us, Lisa said. The galaxy will be alive to not forgive us, Jake replied. That's more than they'll have if we fail. Lisa nodded and began entering commands into her datapad. I'll need 6 hours to prepare the delivery system. You'll have it, Jake promised. As Lisa left to begin her preparations, Jake remained in the empty council chamber. Outside the viewing ports, he could see the lights of the Great Space Station, home to representatives from dozens of species who had lived in peace for thousands of years. In 18 hours, that peace would be over forever. The galaxy would either survive as something unrecognizable, or it would die maintaining its principles. Jake thought about the humans back on Earth, living their lives without knowing that. Their representatives were about to commit the greatest act of genocide in galactic history. He wondered what they would think of the choices he was making in their name. But then, he thought about the alternative. The void swarm consuming every world, every species, every trace of life in the galaxy. Compared to total extinction, genocide seemed almost merciful. Almost Jake activated his personal communicator and contacted Ben and Rick. Gentlemen, he said, we have 18 hours to prepare for the most important battle in galactic history. Time to show them what humans are really capable of. As he left the chamber to begin preparations for the final battle, Jake tried not to think about the fact that victory might be worse than defeat. The galaxy had asked for salvation, and humanity was about to deliver it. Whether anyone would thank them for it remained to be seen. The Void Swarm fleet appeared at the edge of the Nexus system like a plague of metal locusts. 200 massive ships, each one carrying the twisted remains of consumed worlds, moved toward the heart of galactic civilization with unstoppable purpose. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with grim determination. The combined galactic fleet looked pathetic compared to the approaching enemy. 50 ships, most of them hastily converted civilian vessels, against an armada that had conquered half the galaxy. "All ships report ready," announced Captain Ben Harris from his position at the tactical station. "The weapon delivery system is online." Dr. Lisa Park sat at her science station, her hands hovering over the controls that would release her biological weapon. She had spent the last 6 hours preparing the virus that would end the Void Swarm forever. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "The weapon is ready for deployment," she said. "Once we release it, there's no going back." Jake nodded. Around him, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency. Humans and aliens side by side, preparing for a battle that would determine the fate of the galaxy. "Incoming transmission from the Void Swarm fleet," reported Communications Officer Tony Walsh. "Put it through," Jake ordered. The main screen filled with an image that made several bridge crew members step backward. The Void Swarm spokesperson was a twisted combination of organic matter and corrupted technology. It had once been a member of one of the galaxy's peaceful species, but now it was something else entirely. "We are the Void," the creature said, its voice like the sound of metal scraping against stone. "We have consumed your weapons. We have learned your tactics. You will add your distinctiveness to our own. Resistance is futile." "Yeah, well," Jake said, "you haven't met humans yet." The creature tilted its head. "Humans, we have studied your methods. Primitive violence. Chaos without purpose. We will adapt to your disorder as we have adapted to their order." "Good luck with that," Jake replied, and cut the transmission. The battle began exactly as the Void Swarm expected. The Galactic fleet met them in traditional formation, weapons blazing in the darkness of space. Energy beams and particle cannons lit up the void as the two forces clashed. The Void Swarm began adapting immediately. Their ships shifted and changed, developing new armor configurations to counter the Galactic weapons. Within minutes, they were completely immune to the standard fleet armament. "They're adapting to our main weapons," reported Warsinger Kethfer from his ship. "Energy weapons are having no effect." "Phase 2, Jake announced. "All ships implement human modifications." The Galactic fleet suddenly became something the Void Swarm had never seen before. Industrial welders began cutting through enemy hull plating. Garbage disposal units launched improvised projectiles. Luxury cruise ship rammed a Void Swarm destroyer. While playing classical music over its speakers, the enemy fleet tried to adapt. But every ship they faced was using different weapons, different tactics, different approaches to warfare. There was no pattern to learn from, no standardized technology to counter. "It's working," Ben reported. "They can't adapt fast enough. We're actually holding them off." But Jake could see the truth on the tactical display. They were inflicting damage, but not enough. The Void Swarm had too many ships, too much firepower. For every enemy vessel they destroyed, 3 more took its place. "Lisa," Jake said quietly, "it's time." Lisa's hands trembled as she reached for the weapon controls. "Jake, once I do this, we become something the galaxy has never seen before. We become the people who committed genocide to save everyone else." "I know," Jake said. "Do it anyway." The biological weapon launched from the human flagship in a simple missile casing that looked like a converted cargo container. It flew through the battle zone, unnoticed by the Void Swarm forces who were focused on the larger ships attacking them. The missile reached the center of the enemy formation and detonated silently. There was no explosion, no visible effect. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the Void Swarm ships began to die. It started slowly. Individual ships losing power, drifting out of formation. Then entire sections of the fleet went dark as the virus spread through their biological components. The creatures that controlled the ships began collapsing, their nervous systems shutting down as the weapon destroyed their genetic structure. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Sarah Kim from her position at the sensor station. "It's working. They're all dying." Within an hour, the mighty Void Swarm fleet was nothing but debris floating in space. 200 ships that had seemed unstoppable were now silent hulks, drifting in the void. "But the weapon didn't stop there," Commander Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. detecting the virus spreading to the outer systems. It's following the Void Swarm's communication networks back to their home territory? Jake felt his stomach drop. How far will it spread? All the way, Lisa replied. Every Void Swarm ship, every base, every world they've touched. The virus will destroy their entire species. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. They hadn't just won a battle. They had exterminated an entire species from the galaxy. Sir, reported Communications Officer Walsh, we're receiving surrender. Signals from Void Swarm outposts throughout the galaxy. They're dying everywhere. Jake stared at the tactical display, watching as red markers indicating Void Swarm presence began disappearing one by one. In systems thousands of light years away, an entire species was dying because of a decision he had made. How long? I asked. 6 months, Lisa said. Maybe less. By the end of the year, there won't be a single Void Swarm creature left alive anywhere in the galaxy. The celebration began on the Council Station 3 hours later. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to honor the humans who had saved their galaxy. There were speeches about courage and sacrifice, about the triumph of good over evil. Jake stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of alien faces. Some looked grateful, others looked troubled. All of them looked at him differently than they had 3 months ago. Commander Morrison said High Arbiter Zixthera during the ceremony. On behalf of the Galactic Council, we thank you for your service. You have saved our civilization. At what cost? Asked a voice from the crowd. Jake turned to see Ambassador Veltar standing among the other representatives. The Solarian's expression was unreadable. The cost of survival, Jake replied. We did what had to be done, Veltar said quietly. You exterminated an entire species. A species that was exterminating you? Ben Harris pointed out from his position beside Jake. Does that make it right? Asked Counselor Vexterra. Jake looked around the assembly hall. He could see the division in their faces. Some species saw humans as heroes. Others saw them as necessary monsters. A few saw them as simply monsters. I don't know if it was right, Jake said finally. I know it was necessary. The Void Swarm would have consumed every living thing in this galaxy. Now they're gone, and you're alive. And what does that make us? Asked Zexera. Survivors, Jake said. The weeks that followed were filled with complicated negotiations. The galaxy wanted human protection but feared human influence. They needed human innovation but worried about human corruption. The solution was the human integration protocol, complex agreement that allowed humans to participate in galactic affairs while limiting their cultural impact. Humans would serve as military advisors and technological consultants, but they would not be allowed to spread their methods to more than a limited number of species. It's not perfect, Jake told Lisa as they prepared to leave the council station, but it's workable. Do you think we did the right thing? Lisa asked. Jake looked out at the stars through the viewing port. Somewhere out there, entire star systems were empty now, sterilized by the weapon they had created. But somewhere else, billions of beings were alive because of what they had done. I think we did what humans do, Jake said. We solved the problem, even if it made us monsters, especially if it made us monsters, Jake replied. The galaxy asked for saviors. They got humans instead. Sometimes that's how the universe works. As their ship prepared to depart, Jake received one final message from the Galactic Council. It was from a group of young aliens who had learned human fighting methods during the war. Thank you, the message said. You taught us that survival is more important than honor, that winning is more important than looking good, that sometimes you have to be willing to be the villain to save everyone else. Jake smiled grimly as he read the message. Years for prophesied saviors to arrive and bring peace and harmony to their civilization. Instead, they got humanity. Messy, violent, practical humanity that solved problems by breaking them until they worked. The galaxy survived, but it would never be the same. The age of civilized warfare was over. The age of human-style survival had begun, and in the end, that was exactly what the galaxy needed, even if it wasn't what they had wanted. as Dr. Lisa Park noted in her final report to Earth Command. We didn't save the galaxy by being better than the threat. We saved it by being willing to be worse. Stars continued to shine, indifferent to the moral struggles of the beings who lived beneath them.